133rd day of class, the Russian Revolution. And I know during the World War I unit, we talked about the Russians' contribution to World War I and then them dropping out of the war. And I wanted to get into a little more detail today on that story. And I think Winston Churchill was correct when he quoted, "Russia is a riddle wrapped in a mystery inside an enigma." And that's very true. Russia has never, ever, nor does it now, fit neatly into categories. It's a very unique place, historically speaking. So I want you to bear this in mind as we get into the Russian story. And another big part of the Russian story is just how really, really big they are. At its peak, the USSR was 8,144,228 square miles. The continental United States is less than 3 million, to give you some perspective. And the USSR was around from 1917 to 1991, or 1922 to 1992, depending on who you're asking. So if you say 1917, that's when the revolution began, and 91 was when the Soviet Union broke apart. Or you can say 1922, when the Civil War was over and the Red Russians won, to 1992, when it broke down. Now, 1991 and 1992, those were my junior and senior years of high school, so I remember this vividly, and this era of change that was going on in the world. It was an exciting time to be alive, to be honest with you. And from World War I, you remember these terms. The Treaty of Brest-Litovsk, maybe the hardest word I say in world history, and the Bolshevik Revolution. Now, in the context of World War I, it pulled Russia out of the war, and the United States had to fill in that void. But here's the question: why would you do that? Why would you quit? And in class we talked about people who quit teams, or they quit high school, and people in class spoke of how a member of the team quitting was very difficult. Dance teams, we had our dance coordinated, one person's out, we have to figure it out. Cheerleading, especially the people who are the base, throwing the cheerleaders in the air, takes timing, takes rhythm, takes trust. They leave, it really sets you apart. As a wrestling coach, if you don't have a wrestler to wrestle, the other team automatically gets 6 points. And I've had athletes quit in the middle of the season. And in this quitting, we came to a conclusion. There are some good reasons, and there are some not so good reasons. So why did Russia quit in the middle, not finish it up? Well, if you look at this graphic here, look at the casualties by country of the First World War. You can see the Russian Empire suffered tremendous losses. Also, they weren't adequately equipped in a lot of cases. And at home, things were breaking down. So did Russia have a legitimate reason to quit? You can argue one way or the other. Now, the second question we talked about, why would anybody opt for communism? Of all the ways you can govern yourself, why communism? And the moral of the story is, it is better to have a little than nothing at all. And if you recall the analogy where if I brought in a dozen donuts to class, now a dozen donuts to class is not going to feed everybody. And assuming you're really hungry, and I bring in a dozen donuts, and I sit down with one of my students and we eat 6 apiece, we eat them all, and make you watch us eat that. You have 0 donuts, and we have everything. I would guess you'd rather take the donuts, divide them into halves or thirds to feed the entire class, because that half a donut is better than nothing. So these people in Russia who had nothing, these peasants and the proletariat, these people really struggling, they would rather have everybody having the same, everybody having every little, than not having anything at all. So that was the outcome of a really good discussion. And these were the 5 things that we addressed after our discussion. And if you look at the Russian Revolution, 5 parts we wanted to address. The failures of the Tsar. Now, sometimes you might see this T-S-A-R as C-Z-A-R, Caesar, Tsar. And Cyrillic Russian does not translate into English well. So if you see T-S-A-R, C-Z-A-R, same thing. It's the leader of Russia. And then we'll talk about the February or March Revolution, confusing moment in history. The Russian calendar is different than the calendar we have in the West, so February and March depends on the calendar. And then the second of the two revolutions, the October or November Revolution, took place. And then Lenin comes out on top as the leader, and he implements an economic plan, a new plan on how to make money. And when Lenin passes away in his 50s, we see the rise of Joseph Stalin and the fall of Trotsky. So, in terms of the Tsar, now, this is Tsar Nicholas, and his family, the Romanov family, the Romanov dynasty, was ruling Russia for over 300 years. But he was not an effective leader for a couple of reasons. This is not the formula to keep power. Shortages of food and jobs. If people are hungry, they are angry. We've seen it in the French revolutions. I see it in the hour before lunch. Hungry people are angry people. Broke people are not happy people. So you have a lot of people who are hungry and broke. It's not going to end well. Military losses. He kept losing and losing and losing. He even went off to war himself, and he was inept in that role. And he left his wife behind, and his wife brings in this monk Rasputin, this very unusual, bizarre man that they had to kill. It actually took a couple times to kill the guy. And the public mistrusted his wife. This very odd man is brought in, and the public thinks he's making major decisions. Public is hurting, don't have a lot of money, but his family and the royalty are living very luxuriously, and he had an unwillingness to change. He would not change. It was the notion, hey, we've been doing this for 300 years, people like us. He was too blinded by his own arrogance to see that the people were very, very upset. And his entire family, they were killed July 16th, 1918, ending over 300 years. And the legend of Anastasia, and I hate to, burst your bubble for your childhoods here, but that's a myth. That's a legend that one of the Romanov children was able to get away and was found and, escaped. Reality is they were all killed by the new regime. So the Tsar at this point is gone. He's dead. And in this construct of the Russian Revolution, we have the first of the two, the February Revolution. And they got rid of the Romanovs. They've gotten rid of this, the bourgeoisie, as they call them. And at this point, the Romanovs are gone, but after 300 years, what do? You don't have an instant plan. And at this point, they got rid of the monarchy, and there's a temporary government. They're figuring out what to do, and people were clamoring to who was going to lead Russia, which brings us to the October or November Revolution. This is the second of the revolutions. Now, Bolshevik Party leader Vladimir Lenin launched a nearly bloodless coup d'etat against the Duma's provisional government. This provisional government had been assembled by a group of Russian leaders called the bourgeoisie, the capitalist class, the wealthy people, the people with the dough. Lenin instead called for a Soviet government that would be ruled directly by councils of soldiers, peasants, and workers, the proletariats. These are the everyday, hardworking people. And they win. And Lenin becomes the dictator of the world's first communist state. And you can see Lenin here, and you can see some primary sources of both the February Revolution and the October Revolution. But it took a while to get to this point of total power. There was a civil war between the White Russians, people who sided with the old regime, and the Red Russians, the socialist revolutionaries led by Lenin. But again, Lenin did come out on top. And Lenin had a plan to make money for the people. Number one, reduce mandatory food offerings to the peasants. These peasants were living hand to mouth, barely subsisting. Hey, you know what? Keep some of that food for yourself. Peasants were very happy to support him. Regulate supply and production. We don't want economies to go up and down, up and down. We want them steady Eddie, and that's what he attempted to do. Generate money to industrialize. Take some money, let's build some factories. The rest of the world, the industrial world's building up. He felt that the USSR had to follow suit and secure Russia for communism as the way to live. And these three men have very different personalities, very different skill sets, but these are the architects of the revolution. Now, we've already mentioned Lenin. Lenin became the first leader. And this man to the right, Trotsky, very bright man, very educated man, very erudite man. Now, Stalin was not. This guy, Joseph Stalin, was mean. He was tough, and he was scheming. So when Lenin died, the question was, who's going to take over Russia? The scheming, tough guy or the intellectual? Well, I think we know who it was, Stalin. And the way Stalin took over was fear, got his enemies against one another. Really rough way. Maybe one of history's most evil men. We're going to get into him when we talk about World War II. But this man ruled Russia until 1953. So, again, Soviet Russia, USSR, remained all the way until the early 90s. So from this revolution that began in 1917, it spread communism over decades. And also, if you look into the future, this was one of the sides of the Cold War, which we will talk about in a little bit. So thank you for watching.